Looking back, I guess it is appropriate the Elvis movie felt like a 2-hour music video. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dragon's Library. Today I will be reviewing the new biographical music drama film, Elvis. If you're new here, then the first section will cover the film without spoilers. If you don't already know the story, it is Elvis. After that, I will give my story overview with spoilers. If anyone wants to skip that section, there will be a timestamp on screen when that comes up. With all that out of the way, let's get into the review. The movie opens with Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, dying from a stroke in 1997. Penniless and alone as he dies, he calls out to the audience, literally, telling us that he wasn't responsible for Elvis's death. He knows the stories. We all blame him, but he didn't do anything. It was Elvis who squandered. He made Elvis, and then he goes over Elvis's history, trying to convince himself and us that he wasn't the villain of his own story. To be honest, aside from the music video sections, this is a pretty standard biopic. The only other interesting details are the fact we see it through the eyes of the man many believe to have stole from and destroyed a famous musician, and that's about Elvis Presley, widely considered one of the best singers of all time. For good reason, his stuff is really good, although I mostly learned about him as a kid through Lilo and Stitch. Don't at me, those movies are great. And yes, I said movies, I include Lilo and Stitch the movie, and the third movie, and the second one. I include all of them. Yeah, I bet most of you didn't even know there were more. One of them was straight to video. That's beside the point. To be honest, this is just an okay movie. But let's move on from there and get into the actors. So we have a few good actors in this show. Tom Hanks does a good job as the Colonel, convincing, obviously he's a bit egotistical. He's constantly looking at Elvis like he's his meal ticket. He has that bit of darkness in him when we learn his secret, and how he's he has been definitely using Elvis. Even if he doesn't want to admit it near the end. And he's always convinced he isn't the source of every problem of Elvis's career, and that Elvis doesn't keep trying to come back from the failing the Colonel keeps putting him into. Austin Butler, who I look forward to seeing in Dune Part 2, is a fantastic Elvis. He has the energy when he needs it, but also does a good job at the quieter, more contemplative moments, like when Elvis and his wife were watching MLK's funeral. Finally, we have Olivia de Jong, who plays Elvis's wife Priscilla. She has good chemistry with Butler and really sells it in the later scenes as everything was crashing down around them. And the music is great, but I've rarely seen such a blatant piece of Oscar bait in my life. The movie is just kind of okay, to be honest. But everyone I've talked to seems to think it's like the best movie of the year. Is it a tragic and blatant indictment of the music industry whose practices basically steal from artists? Yes, but that's kind of old news at this point. Is it one of the most blatant examples of this behavior? Sure. Is it a competently made film with fun songs? Yeah, but they used Elvis's soundtrack, so they're kind of cheating. But yes, it is amazing. However, I could kind of get the same thing just by watching a bunch of Elvis music videos online and reading the wiki page. Sorry, it's true. This is kind of a short review, but I just don't have much to say about the movie, to be honest. Now, I'm going to have a bit more spoiler stuff, just because I want to talk about some more of the particular beats about Elvis's life and what it came crashing down to, and I feel like most people know that, so I'm going to ask that most people stick around for that spoiler section. However, I am going to give a conclusion here and give it a rating. Biopics have always been meh to me. However, this is competently made, and the music is some of the best around. I do want to emphasize it's still a good movie, but it's not like this perfect best year movie. I still say Everything Everywhere All at Once is the best movie, and anyone who hasn't seen that needs to go watch that. So, chill out, people. In conclusion, I give Elvis an 8 out of 10. It's not bad, but it's definitely not close to being the best movie I've ever seen all year. Okay, I am moving into the spoiler section. If you don't already know how Elvis's life ends and some of the details behind it, and want to see the movie blind to experience that, then skip ahead of this to the time on screen. Alright? Just like the last review, I'm assuming everyone is still here because, it's just Elvis's life. It's not really, there are a lot of spoilers you can have here. So, for those of you who don't know, Elvis grew up pretty poor due to his father getting arrested, and his mother grew up in a black neighborhood back when there was still a lot more heavy segregation, when it was more blatant. And as a result, he grew up around a lot of, choir music and stuff like that, which helped to, impress on him and essentially set his musical tone for his career. He took a lot of inspiration from the black community, and he even often went to go, like, hang out at black bars and sing there. We even have a few scenes with some other, I'm assuming, famous figures from that time. I don't know all the background history of that era, so. Basically, Elvis got his break when he did a song at this carnival show, or in this, like, show, and he basically did this big old rock number, and the Colonel, this traveling sales guy, this traveling circus manager, essentially, saw him, and saw Elvis as the new ticket for money and profit. Of course, Elvis's big thing is that he always, like, danced around and ran around screen, shuddering and shaking. And apparently that was very scandalous for the time. I know how times have changed when you have rock stars, like, ripping off their clothes and stuff, or biting the heads off bats. Yeah, back then it was considered really scandalous that he kept shaking around, making people go crazy. And he was going to be arrested for censorship after a few of their tours. Yeah, they wanted him, like, in suits and stuff like that, all dressed up and unable to move properly so he could sing, but no, you can't do any of that scandalous shaking. And it was just like this thing of just like, oh god, people have always just been like the worst people. Like, you hear it, it's like, they always try and blame every new medium for all the problems with the kids. It's, rock music and gaming and TV and movies and those horrid books I see people reading. And it's always like, parents, get a hold of yourself. Although there is an extra added dose of racism back then because they saw it, Elvis's connection to the black community. A lot of, like, leaders in the southern states where he was performing saw him as breaking and this is a movie quote, I need to make it very clear, I'm making heavy quotation around these words, this is something they say in the movie, racial purity laws. My God, does that sound just atrocious to even say out loud, but that's a thing that was happening back then. And Elvis was apparently breaking down those barriers. So in order to not go to jail for singing music while shaking around after he performed this performance when they told him not to go do all this movement and shaking, he had to go serve in the military for 3 years. Which, again, does not seem legal that they could arrest him for that, but this is like the early 1900s. They were atrocious back then. Sorry, I know some people might have lived in that era, but fuck that era. No, fuck that entire time period. Anyone who thinks we need to go back to more like the early 1900s needs to get over themselves and shut up. We live in a, quite frankly, better time than we did then. Oh, I've never understood people want to go back to the good old days, like the good old days ever really existed. Ugh. But, yeah, Elvis was actually a pretty decent guy, Go figure. Not to say he didn't have his problems, but while he was out, his mother died, and the Colonel essentially became, like, one of the only people he still had a connection to, because he always had a rocky relationship with his father. As a result, it was revealed around this time the Colonel was taking 50% of all of Elvis's money. And throughout the movie, so basically we go to Hollywood, and then Elvis kind of falls out of favor, and they're making him do a Christmas special, and he just hates it. He feels like his entire career is crashing down, the bills need to be paid and stuff like that. Things were going great, now they're not. And they have this whole sequence, and the Colonel's like, if he weren't keeping around all these boys who are just parasitizing off it, it's all his crew, essentially. The people who go to all these movies with him, who do all this stuff with him, who have essentially been his, like, extras and his musicians and everything for his whole career. Like, essentially his background entourage, essentially, that do all this stuff with him, who are actively creating in the process, who work. And the Colonel, who essentially just arranges the deals and is taking 50% of the money, is saying they're taking all the money and spending, when it's revealed he's been gambling all his shares away. And it's around this time people are like, dude, the Colonel, he was a fine manager, but at this point, he's kind of leeching off your success. And Elvis doesn't want to hear it, but he eventually gets really frustrated during this Christmas special, so he goes to these other musicians, and he's asked them what they think of him. And this is actually probably one of the best moments in the movie. It's just, so what do you guys think of me? And it's like, permission to speak freely? Dude, your career is like freaking dead. What the hell? You're doing a Christmas special, going to sing those Christmas carols and all this stuff. He's like, yeah, that's what I was afraid of. And he's not upset at them. He's like, I needed this. I need your help. I want to go back to my roots. I want to figure out what music meant to me. And they were like, well, figure out what inspired you. Get that inspiration back. And so they essentially help him do this music, and the entire time, as they're recording the songs, and they're not the kind of songs the advertisers wanted, they keep going on, Colonel, like, we're gonna quit this. And he convinces them one last time, it's like, you're gonna sing, what was it, Hop Hop on the Rooftops or something like that. You're gonna do it right here for the money. You can do this stupid show with all these other things, but we are getting this money. And Elvis sings something completely different, and they love it, because the reason they wanted a famous name like him is because people like his music. I've never understood the logic there of when, like, producers and stuff like that get a really popular name, but want them to do something completely different. It's like when EA buys a game developer and then tries to make them make something they don't do, like taking a horror developer and trying to make them make a co-op game or something. And it always feels like the producers want to make something that's popular, but they get these really indie talent for the name cachet, and then they try and make those talents do something antithetical to what their work is about. Like, you can just make anything popular, right? You make this stupid thing popular. It's like, no. The reason they're popular is because they do that thing you think is stupid. The rest of us like that thing. So Elvis gets his jam back and keeps going on tour. And eventually, the Colonel is essentially just, like, parasitizing. He's in all these debts. It's like, oh, okay, look, we're just going to go tell him you're not going to be my manager anymore. Because his wife finally convinces him, look, he was a good man, but you've given him a lot over the years. You've done a lot for him. He's in the hospital now. We're going to go see him. We're going to talk with him. And we're going to explain he's not your manager anymore. It's like, yeah, you're right. You should have done this years ago. You're right. And he goes in there, and it's eventually revealed the reason he caved the first time, back in like the early 1900s, where Elvis had to go to the military, was because it was revealed he's not actually a legal citizen of the U.S., he's not a colonel or anything. He's a Dutch citizen, and that's also why they couldn't do all these big, expensive abroad stuff, like they could make Elvis millions, is because if he leaves the country, he won't be able to get back in. Because he doesn't have the proper paperwork. And he essentially guilt trips Elvis into staying, which ends up destroying him mentally over time. Eventually Priscilla leaves him because he falls into drugs and stuff like that. And then he eventually ends up dying during a performance in Vegas. And the Colonel essentially gets blamed because, it eventually comes out to the public that he's took 50% of all the profits. He, worked Elvis like a dog near the end of his life. He caused him massive emotional distress and essentially emotionally blackmailed him into continuing to fund his gambling addiction. Like, when the Colonel's trying to explain how he wasn't the reason Elvis's life fell apart, he's dreaming as his body's dying, and he's in like this infinite Inception-style gambling hall, okay? He was clearly the villain, and the whole thing is about how Elvis, like, there's this one throwaway line near the end where Elvis is like, my greatest fear is that I will die forgotten and alone. He says it to Priscilla after they got divorced. And the irony is that the Colonel died alone and forgotten, this husk of a man that most people will not remember in the long term. Whereas Elvis is so popular, there are entire buildings on this earth dedicated to people trying to mimic his style of speech and actions. And so, yeah, Elvis gets remembered and the Colonel dies alone, forgotten, and unloved because of his actions. Yeah, this was on him. And it's essentially, a giant metaphor for the exploitation of the music industry, the way a lot of the music companies take massive cuts of profit from artists and get the copyrights to their music and essentially can leave the artists, like, broke. Like, there are plenty of artists out there who have been left destitute in the music industry after companies essentially drain them from all they worked and ruin their careers. And you can rabble on about how they deserve their fair cut. Their fair cut definitely isn't what they've been getting. I'm just gonna say it. Of course, nowadays, a lot of artists are starting to break away from those music companies. It's not that everyone has the cachet of, like, Taylor Swift or whatever. She was able to say, screw you, and just, like, re-record her song so she can get the profits from the new versions. But this is the kind of thing that's been going on for a long time. It's a common refrain, and I do feel like, yeah, it's nice they made this movie, but this movie just feels like Oscar bait. I'm just going to keep saying it. I know I said that once already. It feels like Oscar bait. I mean, think about it. This is a early Americana movie about a famous American idol whose career was intricately linked to the growth of media and entertainment and Hollywood, and shows the darker side of producers and is the artist struggling against the machine. I mean, he even was in the military. The only way Elvis's life could be more perfectly suited to be Oscar bait is if while he was in the military he had to fight in a war and they had an entire extended sequence exploring that. That's the only way this could be more Oscar bait than it currently is. I'm sorry, but as someone who has to constantly look at this media, I can't help looking at this for what feels like an awards magnet. And I'm going to be really pissed if this ends up getting more awards or gets them getting Best Picture when Everything Everywhere All at Once is there. I know it's a sci-fi movie. I know genre movies have their troubles, but come on, Hollywood. Come on. So yeah, that's my opinion. Yes, I am slightly biased here, sure. But I also think I'm giving it a fair shot. I give it an 8 out of 10. I didn't, wreck this movie or anything. I think it's fine. I don't think it's bad. I think it's just fine. So with that, let's get back on track for everyone else. Hey everyone, sorry this review was a little short. Didn't think I would be reviewing the movie at all, but in the end I decided, you know what, I watched it. Let's give my opinion. I want to apologize for the chaotic uploads lately. My life has been crazy at the moment. But I always try and make sure I have time for reviews, so these are going to be going up. You can make sure that I will always try and have these up. I'm going to try and not fall a week behind, because I really don't want to. As for what's coming up in the future, I am about to finish the book Babel. I finished the game Thymesia. Solar Opposites on Hulu is another show I've watched. I also saw The Imperfects recently on Netflix. I'm definitely going to probably review that. So look forward to all those reviews sometime in the future. And of course, in a little over 2 weeks, I think, Naomi Novik's new Scholomance book, The Golden Enclaves, will be out. So be on the lookout for that as well. In addition to other shows like Lock and Key Season 3, we got a lot to review in the near future. Plus we got She-Hulk, and oh my god, there's just so much on my plate. Tune in next time for either something comedic or depressing. Bye!